even the best cars have a shelf life. They might be top of their class for 1, 2, perhaps even 3 years, but sooner or later they inevitably slip down the pecking order as newer and just generally better cars are launched. So surely that means this Skoda Karoq is a terrible choice because yes, it was brilliant when it first arrived back in 2017, but it's now one of the oldest SUVs still on sale and there are dozens of newer alternatives to choose from. Well, you'll have to wait until later for the verdict, but I reckon you might be quite surprised by this review. Stay watching for everything you need to know about the Skoda Karoq, and don't forget to subscribe for lots more videos like this one. Now let's start with where the Karoq fits into Skoda's lineup, because when this car was launched more than 7 years ago, it was as a replacement for the Yeti, and it was the smallest SUV that Skoda offered. Now though, there's the even smaller Karoq. So this sits above the Karoq, but below the Kodiaq, which is an altogether bigger car and the only 7-seater Skoda sells. There are also 2 fully electric SUVs in Skoda's range. There's the Elroq, which is about the same size as this, and then there's the larger Enyaq. So that's where the Karoq fits into Skoda's own lineup, but what about the rivals it's up against from other manufacturers? Well, they include 2 of the biggest selling cars in the UK, the Nissan Qashqai and the Kia Sportage. Both of those alternatives are a little bit bigger, but they're a similar SUV shape and they cost similar money to buy. Another rival for this is the Seat Ateca, which is very similar underneath and is actually slightly older. It was launched a few months before the Karoq back in 2016. On to the engines, and they haven't really changed much since this car first appeared. So there's no fancy mild hybrid technology to improve fuel economy, and that might lead you to think that this is going to be really thirsty and cost you a fortune to run. But actually that isn't the case at all. The entry-level 1-litre petrol can officially average almost 49 mpg. And this more powerful 148 brake horsepower 1.5-litre petrol is barely any less frugal on paper. In fact, it uses less fuel than a mild hybrid Kia Sportage. If you want your Karoq with 4-wheel drive, you'll need to either go for the 2-litre TDI diesel with 148 brake horsepower or the 2-litre TSI petrol with 187 bhp. Both of those engines come with a 7-speed dual-clutch automatic gearbox as standard, something you can have on this 1.5-litre petrol as an option, but that isn't available on the entry-level 1-litre. That can only be had with a 6-speed manual box. And that brings me on to price, because despite this being slightly smaller than a Qashqai, it's actually slightly more expensive. So if you go for the 1-litre petrol in entry-level SE edition trim, the brochure price is just under £31,000, although it is worth checking the deals on our website because big discounts on the Karoq are often available. But if you go for 4-wheel drive, especially if you want range-topping Sportline trim, then the price rockets to well over £40,000. So you've got to be a little bit careful when speccing your Karoq to avoid the price creeping into the territory of bigger and better cars. And later on in this video, I'll let you know what we think is the perfect spec to go for. Now, generally speaking, older cars aren't as safe as new ones because the standards are improving all the time, not only in terms of how well cars protect their occupants in a crash, but also the number of aids there are to hopefully avoid you having an accident in the first place. So even though the Karoq has been updated over the years, it's no surprise that it isn't available with as much safety kit as many rivals. And the only way to get blind spot monitoring is to go for range-topping Sportline trim and then pay about £600 extra, which not many people are going to do. And although the Karoq has been crash tested by Euro NCAP and scored 5 stars out of 5, the standards were so much lower back in 2017 that the result has actually now expired. So it can't be fairly compared to the score a car tested today might achieve. That doesn't mean the Karoq is a death trap, and it probably still does a pretty good job of keeping people inside safe. But it's almost certainly not as good at doing that as more modern family SUVs, including the Qashqai. Now, if you're thinking this is an old car now, so it's bound to have a really old-fashioned interior that's just not very nice to sit in, well, the Karoq is actually very impressive when it comes to interior quality. This doesn't just have a better interior than some of Skoda's latest models, like the Superb, for example. Believe it or not, this has a higher quality interior than the latest Audi Q5. And if you're thinking, what on earth is this guy smoking? Well, let me show you what I mean. Everywhere you touch pretty much, you'll find dense, squidgy, expensive feeling plastics on the dashboard here, not just in one little section, but all over it, and on the insides of the doors, even on the center console down here. This plastic is padded and soft to the touch. You would never find that on a car in this price point today, because manufacturers are desperately trying to cut costs to increase profits, but also pay for the tech in their electric cars. Anyway, this interior isn't just trimmed with some upmarket and plush materials. It feels really solid, extremely well put together. In fact, I can't think of any car in this class that has a better quality interior, even though you might argue that the design is quite low-key and there isn't a great deal when it comes to personalisation either. One area the Karoq is showing its age though is infotainment, because this screen is quite small. It measures just 9.2 inches, and if you go for entry-level SE Edition trim, then that screen size shrinks to just 8 inches. But it's not a big deal really, because all versions come with everything you need, including Apple CarPlay and Android Auto smartphone mirroring. And the screen itself is bright, it's quick to respond when you press it, and because there aren't a million different functions, the operating system is actually easy to get to grips with. It's also very refreshing that you get proper physical knobs and dials to adjust the air conditioning. You don't get those on the latest Elroq. You have to use the touchscreen even just to adjust the interior temperature. So that is really, really good. Same story when it comes to the controls on the steering wheel, because a lot of modern cars have haptic or touch sensitive controls here. Not in the Karoq. You get proper physical buttons which are really easy to use while you're driving. One thing I should point out though is that if you order your Karoq today, it will have Skoda spelt out in letters across the steering wheel rather than this logo, just in case you forget which brand of car you're driving. Anyway, the driving position is generally superb. You don't feel quite as high up as you do in a Qashqai or even a Renault Sambios, but you don't just feel like you're in a regular hatchback, and there is loads of adjustment in both the steering wheel and also in the driver's seat. All versions come with adjustable lumbar support as standard too, which is great for long distance comfort. And on top of that, the Karoq is very easy to see out of. These pillars here are slim. These windows at the side are tall, so there are no annoying blind spots. And even when you're looking back over your shoulder, in a lot of modern cars, you can barely see anything. But here, there is some glass that you can see through, although it is a good thing that all versions come with front and rear parking sensors and a reversing camera as standard. Really impressive for storage too. There are some big door pockets down here. There's a tray at the bottom of the center console that has a wireless charging pad in it. Further back here, there are two cup holders with a spot for the key, and there's also decent storage under the central armrest there. You might have noticed there is a tray up on top of the dashboard here, which is useful for smaller things, but you wouldn't want to put your coffee on it. In the back, the Karoq is pretty roomy. Okay, it doesn't have quite as much legroom as a Sportage, that's a slightly longer car, but as you can see, I'm absolutely fine back here. This seat is set up for my driving position, and headroom is actually really, really good. Loads of space above my head there. And even if you add the optional panoramic sunroof, then a 6-footer like me won't feel claustrophobic back here. That is a problem in the Kia Sportage. If you add a sunroof to that car, then the ceiling does get quite low. Just like in the front, you have a good view out thanks to these tall side windows, and all versions come with these tray tables and tablet holders, so that is really, really handy if you've got kids. What's not so great is this enormous hump on the floor here. And because the Karoq is also a narrower car than a Sportage or a Qashqai, it means it isn't quite so great at fitting 3 people across the back here. It's a little bit more squeezed. But what neither of those cars have are Skoda's VarioFlex rear seats. Now, hopefully this car doesn't have them fitted, so I can't show you how they work, but they are an £815 option if you go for SE Edition or SEL Edition. And what they effectively do is replace this regular 3-seat bench with 3 individual chairs. Each of those can slide back and forth independently of one another. You can also recline the angle of the backrest, and you can even remove the seats from the car entirely, although it is worth bearing in mind they are quite heavy. Definitely worth considering though. The only thing you do lose if you go for the VarioFlex rear seats is the option to have a height adjustable boot floor, which you can have on this version for an extra £215. Helpfully, this car doesn't actually have one, so I can't show you, but if it did, and I put that floor into its highest setting there, then it would pretty much remove that big drop down from the boot entrance onto the boot floor. And if I fold down the rear seats, which I can do by pulling these levers on the walls of the boot, that height adjustable boot floor would iron out that enormous step there in the floor of the extended low bay. But regardless, the Karoq has a pretty big boot. We managed to fit 9 carry-on suitcases below this partial shelf there, which is one more than we fitted in a Kia Sportage or a Seat Ateca, and you get some handy hooks on the sides of the boot here to hang your shopping on. So overall, the Karoq is pretty impressive when it comes to boot space. Now this is a Skoda, so you might assume it scores well for comfort and refinement, but perhaps not quite so well for handling. But actually, this is pretty agile. As I said earlier, it's slightly smaller than a Qashqai or a Sportage, and it does really feel that way on winding country lanes like this because it turns into corners a little bit more eagerly and there's less body roll as well. The only thing I would say though is that the steering is quite light. So if you've gone for an SEL edition or a Sport line, then you might want to switch to Sport mode because that adds a bit of weight to the steering and gives you a bit more confidence. You don't get that on the entry-level SE edition. Now comfort isn't bad either, although it's not quite up there with the Sportage and the Qashqai. It's pretty smooth at faster speeds on the motorway, for example, but on rural roads like this and around town, things can get a little bit choppy, particularly if you go for 19-inch alloys, which are the biggest available on the Karoq. And the fact that there's quite a bit of noise from the suspension doesn't help. You might be able to hear it, but when you go over bumps and nasty patches of tarmac, you can hear booms and thuds from the suspension. So overall, there are quieter and more refined cars in this class. As for engines, you might assume that the entry-level 1 litre, 114 brake horsepower petrol is gutless, but performance is actually okay, particularly if you don't plan to load your Karoq up with lots of people and luggage regularly. This 1.5 is much stronger though. It can do 0 to 62 in around 9 seconds, no matter whether you go for the standard 6-speed manual gearbox or this 7-speed auto. And although it isn't the quietest engine in the world when you work it hard, you don't need to do that very often because there's plenty of pull from low revs. We would steer clear of the 2 litre TDI and 2 litre TSI engines though, unless you're desperate for 4-wheel drive. It's not that they're bad engines, they just push the price a little too high, partly because they're only available with the higher trim levels. And that brings me on to how to spec the perfect Skoda Karoq. This 1.5 litre petrol is the engine to go for, and unless you're desperate for an automatic, we'd stick with the standard 6-speed manual because it's a very nice gearbox and you'll save yourself 1,450 quid. As for trims, this SEL edition is very tempting, but we think entry-level SE edition trim represents even better value for money. The only things you really miss out on are adaptive cruise control and a powered tailgate, and you also get the smaller 8-inch touchscreen infotainment system. Steer clear of range-topping Sportline trim though, because it's just too expensive. If you want to add options, we definitely recommend the VarioFlex rear seats, and it's also worth considering the £620 safety package, which adds knee airbags for the driver and side airbags for people sitting in the back. Even if you add both of those things, the bill only comes to just over £33,000, or about £405 a month if you put down a 10% deposit on a 4-year PCP deal. So the Karoq might be old, but time has been very kind to it. It's no longer a class leader, but it's good to drive, it's very practical, and it has a remarkably high quality interior. And as long as you choose carefully, it's good value for money. Thanks for watching this review. If you want to watch another one, click up there. And for our full detailed written review on the Skoda Karoq, click there to head to whatcar.com.